Welcome to this week's Pandemic Reflections. And welcome to my channel. And this week I'm really excited because I've got a very special guest, and his name is David Booth. Now, David, welcome to the channel. How are you?
I'm doing well, thank you, Lizzie. Nice to see you. I feel like we've been trying to make this happen for a while.
Yeah, I know we have. And I should ask, are you feeling better now? Because I know a couple of weeks ago we weren't able to meet because you weren't very well. Are you okay?
I'm fine. It's funny in the context of our discussion today. I actually had an old-fashioned flu bug, and so I found myself laid up, but also doing the rapid tests, each day just to try to make sure that it was what it was.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm fine. But people still are struggling with the common flu.
Oh, I know. It's really, yeah, it's very confusing, isn't it? My husband tested positive for COVID a couple of days ago, and we hadn't actually been at home for a week. So he asked us not to come home and see him, and so we're staying with my sister-in-law at the moment. So I'm in a different location, and I just hope that the internet holds up because it's a bit yogurt pots around here. I have to be honest.
Yeah. Okay.
But anyway, I'm glad to hear you're feeling better. So I'd like to thank you for coming on and having a chat with us about your experience of the pandemic. So the last couple of years, I'm really interested in how it impacted you personally, professionally, and you are free to talk about either of those in as much or as little detail as you would like to. So why
Yeah.
don't I get out of the way and let you tell us?
Well, I think I was slow to fully comprehend it, like most people, I would imagine. It must have been around 2020 or so when my wife and I first started reading about the animals in the cages in Wuhan in China. And she's a nurse. I'm a high school English teacher. And she said to me, "Oh, this is going to be a global thing," right away.
Wow.
And I said, "No, I mean, I couldn't get there. I have SARS vaguely in my memory, and I thought to myself, how could this possibly be?" But it didn't take long after that. It was really just weeks after that that we began to hear about the spread of COVID-19. And so how did that affect me? At first, I think I was just kind of just unaware of what it could be like, and it was happening at an odd time because I am an English teacher by training. But at that moment, I'd actually taken a break from my career. I was actually taking a year off just to kind of reassess what I wanted to do with my work life. I was looking at the possibility of going into the hospitality industry of all things, and so I was working at an iconic spa in San Francisco as a good greeter, basically, and but just as a way of resting, but also as a way of kind of seeing what that was like. Um, and um, and then everyone was getting sick, and then we were being asked to shelter in place, and so it was quite wild. And of course, the spa would never stay open during a pandemic, and so it was immediately closed. So the first way that the epidemic Oh, and the other thing I was doing is I had just published a book of poetry, and so I was kind of had that excitement of being a published poet. I was thinking about a new job, and then the epidemic started, and the major effect that the epidemic had on me was it put me back into teaching. Because one of the things that happened is that there was all these kids suddenly who were going to be learning online. I'm almost positive you've covered that a bit in your interviewing, but there were all these kids that were going to be suddenly online, and I felt a kind of call to duty to go right back into teaching, and I did. And I won't bore you with the details of that, but I did end up working with kids in a county north of San Francisco, where for upwards of a year in English and history before deciding to actually then return to teaching English on a full-time basis. So that was a pretty major impact that the epidemic had on me. I'd even gone so far as to enroll in classes in hospitality, before this all happened. But I have to say that the pandemic itself kind of miniaturized the importance of hospitality, for me. And I was reminded, in a sense, of that way in which all teaching is some kind of social justice, or some kind of community service, or some kind of responsibility.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so that was an immediate effect. The other thing that I thought was interesting is that it was in that time that you heard those funny stories about kind of like dolphins swimming in the canals of Venice. I'm sure you heard that at some point. And
Of course, yeah.
yeah, but I was quite experiencing that, and I was out on my bicycle every day, riding around San Francisco, taking photographs, because I couldn't believe how different the world was without the emissions, the fossil fuel emissions. And I was having that kind of dolphin in Venice kind of experience with I was taking photographs with my smartphone, going around on my bicycle. And so I also had this sense of, like many people did, a kind of ideal sense of how things could be. Yeah.
I really know what you mean. It was beautiful, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was gorgeous. Everything seemed quite vivid, and everything seemed quite
So
clean.
clean.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
it was so clean.
Yeah, so that was exciting for me, and I think that I wasn't alone in that. But I think as we get into this, one of the things I began to notice is that my wife and I are fairly introverted, she more than I, and so as we had to shelter in place, for a lot of us it was like, welcome to my world, this is great. But what was interesting is that we have friends, and I was teaching kids and working with families, and for a lot of people this was slowly becoming kind of like a hell. And maybe your guest Leonard was touching on that when he was thinking about kind of the mental health stuff that comes with being trapped like that. And so I think that kind of that spoiled the dolphins in Venice thing quite a bit for me, because I realized, even with the kids I was helping, that there was a way in which they were beginning to have dreams deferred, and I think that I was this is not quite, this is fairly a false equivalent, but I began to think about in the United States here, we have in our history the internment of Japanese Americans during World War II, and it's not like that, except to say that if you listen to some of the survivors of those camps, who were high school age or middle school age during that time, they all talk about again, dream deferred or dream denied, or being, this idea of not being able to go to school. And so I was beginning to become aware of that on kind of a more serious level, and on a less serious level. I was really, working with wonderful, beautiful teenagers who nevertheless needed to rebel a little bit against what was happening. And I was also, of course, working with kids for whom I think the issue that we were facing might have been things like depression, for instance. And so it was nothing to, as liberating, ironically, as the pandemic could feel to me in moments when I was out on my bicycle taking pictures, or doing the important work of being a teacher. It was absolutely impossible, as you mentioned before we started recording here, not to fully notice kind of the spectrum of experience when it comes to COVID-19.
I know exactly what you mean, and I can relate to that feeling of being an introvert and actually kind of thinking, not so bad actually. I don't have to go anywhere. I don't have to be anywhere. I can just hang out at home, and there's nothing that's expected of me apart from, well, for us, it was kind of concentrating on the children and their learning and their development, and, the normal day-to-day stuff, the
Right.
normal life. And also that, the recognition of how clean and quiet everything was. So we live not too far away from a main road. And it's not the busiest main road, but it's a fairly busy road. And it was just amazing to be able to walk up and down it. And there was nothing at all coming up and down it. It was amazing. And I kind of miss those days. And I miss being able to go into town when we were going to get the groceries and just thinking, right now it would be full of tourists. It would be absolutely heaving. You wouldn't be able to move. And the weather was so gorgeous. It was like a treat, really.
Yeah.
But then I felt guilty at the same time because I was thinking that, there were a lot of people who weren't in small spaces with people that they didn't necessarily get on with. And absolutely, mental health problems were starting to develop for many, many people, with existing ones or maybe that hadn't experienced mental health problems before. And that's not a great situation to be in. I'd say for me, there was a bit of depression on the second lockdown, and it took a couple of weeks to get used to it because it was a change in routine. But I mean, once a couple of weeks was out of the way, it was more or less, it was fine.
Yeah.
But it wasn't like that for everyone at all. Did you find that peace and that solitude, did it help you in a creative way? I'm just wondering, because I know that you are an excellent writer, and so I'm wondering whether it was a good time for you to write.
Let me read something to you briefly, real quickly, about this idea that you mentioned about guilt and doing well when someone isn't. This is the first thing I wrote about COVID. And it's just it's just a paragraph long. And it's just a brief little vignette, and this will begin to answer your question. A sixth grader asks her teacher if it is okay. Pardon me, let me start again. A sixth grader asks her teacher, is it okay to have a good day while others are suffering? Before he can answer, her peers shout into mics like shouts in a brick-and-mortar classroom. Their faces light up his view screen. Voices draw down the tedium of sheltering. Be happy about your happiness, they try to tell each other, cognizant of the world happening around you. He doesn't change the subject so much as its direction when he asks, what's one thing you'd like to do when life returns to normal? The lists they make start small and grow increasingly unrealistic.
Wow. I really like that. And I think it's probably quite fair, isn't it? Be happy in your happiness.
Yeah. And so in terms of your question to me about creative output, I mean, I'm a fairly lowercase m. I'm fairly manic in my output, and so it probably wouldn't take a pandemic for me to do my thing. Nevertheless, that question that I raised there about kind of being happy in my own happiness is something I've always been interested in, and it was put to the test a bit with pandemic, and it seemed that my best way to respond was through creative writing and taking snapshots with my smartphone and all that stuff. So yeah, I felt really I felt pretty revved up, by the times, and I did write just a ton of words, and some of them will never see the light of day, but some of them are making their way, as we speak, probably into little poems and stories.
That's fantastic. And how about life for your wife? You mentioned that she's a nurse.
Yeah.
So did that mean that she was working a great deal? Was she on call, doing her regular job, but just in a very different environment? I was wondering how life was for her.
Yeah. So, and I wish she were here now because she could pop in and tell us herself. But she definitely, she never stopped, and she was always in person, and it did mean at different times, there are protocols for how she would protect herself with clothing. I want to say some kind of hazmat suit or something, but I don't know what it was really, but it was certainly goggles and layers and disinfectants and everything. And she's not a hospital nurse. She's in a clinic here at the University of California in San Francisco, and I won't say much more about her because I don't have her here to tell me that's okay. But she was definitely, going to work every day and helping people with their health issues. And we, I don't know, I can't really explain this to you, Elysium. I don't know why it is that we were never too worried, because if you imagine, I was a high school teacher, and I did eventually go back in person, and she was always in person. And we were very trusting of government and science the whole time, which is to say that we always did what we did the recommendation always, and we never worried about getting sick. I'm not convinced that we won't get sick still, but it is kind of just this idea that we just played by the rules and we've been okay, even though we've been fairly exposed, in our lives.
Yeah, I can understand that. And I kind of feel like the rules, certainly in the UK, were they were quite prescriptive to such a level that they did engender a sense of feeling safety because you didn't have any other choice other than to follow them and to trust in them. So would you say it was the same there? I know that we would have been working under a different set of guidelines, but
I think that I may be wrong about this, so you'll have to correct me. But I think that you might have a slightly less intense version of something we have here, where there's quite a divide between those who are willing to trust government and science and those who are not. In the United States, it's a strange kind of thing, and I probably can't even articulate what I want to say. But the idea of like not wearing a mask or wearing a mask quickly became political, and it's very difficult to kind of describe, because I'm 53 years old, and I mean all of my adult life I've always known what we very commonly talk about today as an anti-vaxxer, and I have to say that I've never had any kind of. It doesn't surprise me that some people wouldn't want to take some medicine. It doesn't. I mean, the idea that we would have 100% cooperation this seems impossible to me. I mean, I've known a lot of people who don't want vaccinations for pretty convincing reasons, and so I could never actually bear a grudge necessarily against that or against those people. At the same time, I'm living with a nurse, and things are getting quite serious, and we're beginning to talk about. Just to use the jargon of science, we're beginning to talk and think about the health of the herd. And so the whole debate is going again. And I don't know where I'm going with this, but it's just to say that there was a lot of conflict in this country, and there continues to be, about the role of government in our lives. And that's really what it comes down to. Here anyway. Is it similar there? Do I have that right, or is it a smaller scale? What would you say about it?
I think it's probably fair to say that's happening here as well. Yes, and like you, I understand both sides of the argument, if I interpret your words correctly, because there are people who are very, very on one side or the other, and they vehemently withhold their positions and disagree with the other side. But there are also people who sit on the fence and understand both sides of the perspective. So I almost feel like instead of two camps, there are three camps. It would be nice if there were more people who would value and respect the opinions of both sides. I know that in many families, for example, it's caused fallouts. And I don't remember a time in my life where there has been such a huge political issue, because it has become politicized. You're right. It's caused such huge disagreements across the population, apart from Brexit, which of course is not actually that long ago, but that's something that also divided families and friendship groups. So I kind of feel like, we're almost in this trend of things happening that divide people's opinions and loyalties even. It has caused a problem. Distrusting government, I think that our Prime Minister Boris Johnson hasn't really done himself that many favours recently. It's funny, you must have heard about the parties that he was having in lockdown. I'm sure that it was world news. And I was with my cousin the other day, and we were out in the park, and the news flashed up on my phone, and it said, Johnson and Sunak to be fired over lockdown parties. And I said, oh, look at that, they're going to be fired over those parties. And then I looked again a bit later, and I was like, oh no, just fined. Misread it. I mean, that would have been huge news. I don't think that they're going to be removed from office at all. But it comes back to this idea of this mistrust in the people who are supposed to be responsible for looking after us. It doesn't really feel like that's the case at all. At the same time, I have to say that although I'm not a fan of their work, what an awful time to have been in any position of power and have to try to do the best for the majority of the people in your country. You know, that there has to be a little bit of sympathy and understanding, even if you think that there were mistakes and potentially disastrous things that happened. I don't think I would have liked that job at the moment. So,
Right, and I think the other thing I would add to what you're saying, and I can't actually answer my own question, is what to do with those 30-year lifelong relations with people who have been really politicized, in an opposite direction from you. You know, like I know guys who I've known for 30 years who have suddenly taken a hard right, yeah, and I'm not really interested in losing those friends, and so what I have to decide, and maybe this is where my question comes, where I can't answer. What does it say about them? You know, they can't be, they can't be forgiven or worked with, and I think that's a hard question.
it's a really hard question. And one of the things that we touched on in a previous interview, it was with John Clay, was the role of social media and the possibility of our opinions and our political outlooks being affected by social media, whether we were all perhaps the product of social media conditioning. I don't know. Are you a big user of social media? I know I met you through Reshma, and I know you through Twitter. Do you think that it's possible that people's outlooks have been altered by their social media, what they're seeing, or is that just not something that happens? I'm not sure.
Well, I wish we had Mr. Clay here to help us with this, because it's not really my area. But I do think that it's I can only imagine that our social and political perspectives have been fairly warped by social media. But I'd have to. I don't know. I'm hesitant to answer, but I'll say a few things that he must have touched on. I mean, I do think that everyone can have is gaining a wider audience than ever before. And so I think that one of the things that's happened is that everyone has been celebritized in a sense. And so John would probably be able to run with that if he hasn't already. But it's just this idea that we all have this platform, that we all have our own platform. And I think that the other thing that's happening is that the responses that we seem to be receiving from people about any given issue are as emotional as they are political or intellectual, and I think that people are playing out their psychologies, in a way that everything becomes quite personal. And I think the other thing that's very difficult about all this is that we've come to a point in the United States of America where everything is so incredibly ideological that if you're actually doing something that's outside of what the other side believes, it's actually a question now of morality. And that is, and people are talking about that. People are basically, it's just become more of a life and death kind of thing than some kind of political debate has been in this country in the past. Does that make kind of sense?
Yeah, it really does.
Yeah, there's a lot more anger. I think that there's a lot more anger, and in our and I don't know enough about England to say something more universal. It's all with the Trump administration and with this and social media. There's been a true invitation for people for white supremacists to step forward and kind of say their piece, and so that's up a bit too. It's actually it's pretty scary actually. But I'm beginning to kind of lose my thread here. But am I making some kind of sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
In as far as the UK and certainly across Europe, there has been an uprising of the far right over the last few years. So I'm almost not surprised to hear that the same thing in the USA. If I'm right in lumping white supremacists in with the far right, I mean, I wouldn't want to offend those guys.
Yeah, yeah. I don't want. That's a nice point. I don't know how to lump either or not lump. I do think there's something else to, since we're moving more and more into the abstract. I should say that, and again, I don't know how to tie this back to social media necessarily, but there does seem to also be an issue here with poverty. It's interesting to bring up poverty on Good Friday and think of, in thinking about, Jesus Christ's main mission. But it is interesting that a lot of people who are angry, a lot of people who are casting aspersions and proverbial stones at others, at immigrants, for instance, are also living in or near poverty. And so again, I'm not a sociologist or a historian, but I do think that all of this is a toxic mix, and everyone, again, to try to at least roughly bring it back to social media, everyone has their own microphone.
Cool.
And I think that's what's happening. And I think one of the things that's weird about me saying that is that there's implicit in what I'm saying is the possibility that some people should have microphones and some people shouldn't. I'm not comfortable saying that either. But I do think that if we can speak objectively about social media, we can at the very least say that it has a kind of destabilizing effect on democracy.
Oh, I love those words, and I completely agree with you. And my concern at the moment is that, and I know we're veering off the topic of the pandemic a little bit, but I feel like we're in a huge time of global upheaval, and it's been going on for a while, even before the pandemic. And I would say that the phase that we're moving into now with the current troubles over in Ukraine are only going to exaggerate what's already been happening. You mentioned poverty and certainly the reaction to immigration. And I think that because of the issues that we're going to have coming with the energy crisis, and that will spill over into the food crisis. And I think that we will have a great deal of displacement from all over the world, not just from Eastern Europe over to further into the West, but I think that it is going to be countries like African countries are going to really suffer. I think that for me, this feels like, and gosh, this is such a depressing way to put it, but it feels like a house of cards, an economic house of cards that's starting to collapse. And I think we're in for a rocky ride over the next couple of years. I don't know whether it's just me that thinks that. I don't know. How does your horizon look from where you are?
I think I would agree with it, mostly everything you just said. I think there are ways for me to kind of, like, even if I think about COVID-19, I mean, for me, I also saw some positive things happen. I saw people practicing for those horizons in a way. I saw people kind of acclimating to the kind of deprivation that comes with a pandemic that we will kind of look back on as maybe a kind of a signal or a harbinger to what is coming. I think COVID's going to continue to be with us. I guess I'm saying is this: I don't know the answer to your question, but I do know that when we talk about these things, we often leave out resilience. And I think that is we leave out we leave out our own responses, and so I think we're talking about some pretty scary stuff right now, and I think we're doing an okay job of it, and I think we should be talking about it. But I also think that I think about like young social entrepreneurs, for instance, kind of imagining kind of a future. Where we're somehow, getting water out of the sea in an affordable way, and I don't have this social entrepreneur's imagination, to be honest, but I do think that we're in fairly good hands with the kids I've been able to meet. But that doesn't mean these things aren't going to exist. But I do think that we want to include our responses in the mix of how it is that we choose to worry. If that makes any sense. But I think I'm sorry. I think all the things that you mentioned, though, are of concern.
I like the way you bring up worry, because
Hmm.
certainly I've never felt so worried as I have. So when the pandemic started, very worried, kind of chilled out. And
Yeah.
then when the war started as well, very worried. And I'm still in that phase of actually being quite worried, and then trying to recalibrate the rest of everything else to kind of keep up with that. Um, and I'm not even in a place where I feel threatened, but I'm worried about the future of the world, I suppose.
Yeah.
But
Well,
you are right.
yeah.
To bring up resilience, because we coped with COVID, we came out of it the other side, and we will, whatever happens next, we will come out the other side as well.
Yeah, I would just go even just to this first line that I read to you. A sixth grader asked her teacher, "Is it okay to have a good day while others are suffering?" I think that it's a hard question. I think that the war, of course, is it's almost beyond words how awful the war is.
Mm,
And as you said, you're out of its reach. I'm out of its reach. I'm going to be in the UK in June, taking a vacation. While this incredible stuff happens. I mean, it's what's happening there is really kind of particularly hard. We don't really. I mean, people keep making comparisons of it to events in history. Compare or not, one of the things that we see a massive army going in and simply simply kind of attacking unprovoked, arguably anyway. The politics are complex, but unprovoked, people who aren't soldiers. People
mm,
who are simply taking up arms. In many cases, in addition to those people that identify themselves as the Ukrainian army, but I guess what I'm saying is that it's unspeakably cruel.
mm. It is.
Yeah, and I think that's what it is that people like us, many of us are everywhere, are having to kind of contend with. And so this question of how can I possibly be happy with such suffering happening right over there, um,
Mm.
and I don't have the answer to that, but I do know that I would imagine that it's probably good for us to know as much as we can and to also be grateful for what we have.
Absolutely. I agree with that. Okay, so this is a question that I've been asking everybody. Um, do you think it's over? How do you feel COVID is now? Is it still around? Is it still a threat? And do you feel like the pandemic has come or is coming to an end?
I think that one of the things I meant to do if I hadn't got our time confused is I meant to actually look up the word pandemic and to kind of think about its etymology a bit is just where it comes from. I was thinking a lot students. I've been working with some students who are older. There's a very famous playwright in the United States called Jared Kushner. I mean, Jared Kushner. Oh my God, that's quite a slip. Tony Kushner. Tony Kushner, and he wrote a play that you may have heard of called Angels in America. Do you know Angel? Yeah. Well, it's
I'm
a
not.
yeah, it's a very famous play, and it's a play about the AIDS epidemic, the HIV/AIDS in the early
Mm,
'80s in New York and San Francisco. And it's a very beautifully written play, a powerful play, and I had a chance to see it many, many years ago. And they even made it into a miniseries on HBO at some point. Um, Anyway, I was thinking about this, and I was wondering. It was called an epidemic, and I had some questions about whether it was a pandemic or epidemic. But whatever the case is, certainly people still get AIDS, and it's still with us.
yeah.
As something. And I was just kind of thinking in my mind about I was trying to compare it with things like SARS and things like COVID-19 and things like influenza, and nothing quite lines up, for
Mm,
me as I think about it. Um, but I will say this that AIDS is something that has an enduring dark legacy. In a way that SARS, for instance, doesn't seem to, or mad cow's disease doesn't seem to have. Um, and I think that we'll know about it for the rest of our lives.
mhm,
COVID-19, I think, even though I wrote a lot about COVID-19 in a fairly in a 2 year period, it's going to continue to be with us, but I think that I'm not. This isn't original to me, but it's going to become more like the flu itself. So I don't think that. I mean, sometimes when you tell a young person that flu killed killed millions of people at a certain time in the first half of the 20th century, they're like, "Huh? What?" I don't think that. I don't think that COVID will necessarily have the legacy. Have the legacy of HIV/AIDS. I don't think that. I don't think that it's like I said earlier when I was talking about the internment of Japanese. I thought that was a false equivalent. But I'm just kind of working metaphorically to try to kind of answer your question for myself. And I think ultimately, at the end of the day, I think we're going to continue to get COVID in more and less serious strains, and that we're going to be vaccinated for it as we go.
Yeah, I think you could be quite right. At my end, I was kind of thinking, yeah, we're done with this. Things feel like they're going back to normal. We don't have masks when you go into shops anymore, or restaurants, cafes, and things. We don't have any restrictions either. They had to lift those after the news of the parties came out. So it feels very normal, but it's not. It's still here. And as I mentioned earlier, my husband's down with it at the moment, and and so it's still causing chaos. He's not going to be at work now until he has 2 positive tests.
Right.
We're not going to go home until he has 2 positive tests.
Right.
And it's it's Easter weekend. It's a very family-oriented time, so we are kind of planning a very, very socially distanced picnic where we're on 2 separate picnic blankets in a kind of roundabout location, so that we can wave at each other and enjoy a bit of normality on Easter Sunday. But I mean, it's not great. So yeah, maybe I take back some of my earlier proclamations that it's over, we're done with this now. It's really not, is it?
Yeah, I don't know. But I do want us to. It's interesting. I mean, I think we're being also invited to pay attention. When we go out. I just fear that. I just don't want us to feel like we're. I just don't want any of us to live in fear, I guess. But I still think that one more thing. I don't know. One more thing I will say about this is that if you think about kind of how long it's taken up to this point, maybe 2 years or whatever it is, people in San Francisco and all over the world have, even in a 2 year period, have radically changed their lives. I mean, many people in this 2 year ordeal did things like move, and become kind of remote employees and stuff. And a question I have to ask, not critically, is, do we really think that 2 years is such a long time, considering all that's possible? Is 2 years long enough to kind of change everything? And yet we have. So I also think that we're not quite used to the kind of inconvenience this has become. I make that statement, and I also want to acknowledge that I'm not acknowledging, the people who have lost loved ones, to COVID. So I don't want to come across to your audience as insensitive to that. But I am also aware that I'm just super aware that we just as a people we haven't shown extreme patience. And I think that. Part of it has to do with what you've already mentioned about kind of the cooped upness, of this experience. It's hard for us to kind of, we get claustrophobic or something, and it's part of it.
Yeah, definitely harder for some over others. I would absolutely agree with that one. And I suppose going back to some of the political feelings that emerged. I can imagine that that's probably to do with the experience of going through the pandemic as well. I'm not surprised that happened. But you are right, life does go. And there were many people who kind of came out on top from having such an experience. People who had chance to reflect on their lives, for example, people whose careers changed, and maybe that was a scary situation to be in, but many people, their situations completely turned on their heads, like the way that you explained with your teaching experience. I think that many people worked really, really hard, as you were discussing the way that your wife did. And certainly my husband too, he's a key worker. He works with children with mainly autism, actually.
Oh, wow.
And they especially found the process of lockdown a very difficult thing to go through. So there was an awful lot of work that he had to do during lockdown. And then there were those people who started a new business, maybe, who changed their entire situation. I know people who moved house, who had babies. I don't know many people who got married. That was not very possible over lockdown.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
life, it really does.
Yeah, I wish I had some numbers in front of me now, but we've been reporting about people who are quitting their jobs even now, and it seems that one of the things that's happened, which is related to what you were just saying, is that people are kind of sizing things up a bit and saying life is too short for me to do this. You know, so there's some of that going on too. So I think it's shaken a lot of things up. I mean, we could go on and on about it. I will share one thing that did happen to me during COVID. And that's that with some people in your country and also many people around the U.S., we started a group of reading Shakespeare's plays online.
Wow.
Yeah, it was cool. And I won't read it all, it's too long, but there's a bit of it here. So anyway, here's just a little bit of this, and this is called A Triumph Was a Public Show, reading Shakespeare while sheltering in place. Saturday noon finds 8 friends gathered virtually for a read-around of A Midsummer's Night's Dream. I am one of them. I'm always one. This circle is the one I've belonged to the longest. At 60, our host Alan is 10 years older than I am and taking our sheltering period to grow the long, free beard he craved wearing as a child. He strokes it. He sits beside his wife Rachel in their love seat flanked by antique lampshades. It's good to see them. It's good to see everybody. Stacy, Pauline, Ransom, Mel, Bernard, Erica, and Sandy looking so healthy. We live in California, North Carolina, Chicago, Turkey, and London. Masks may hang from our necks, but again, we are healthy. Everyone's hair is longer. Looking past their smiling faces on my computer screen, I'm drawn to incidentals. Spines of books about anthropology, cooking, umbrella handle, tidiness, a painting of a squirrel in a tree of Chinese lettering, weariness, chaos, autumnal colors, red and golden, minimalist, business as usual, shabby chic, framed certificates of achievement, framed elders, children's transitional look, mad scientists, a pot of ivy hanging in macrame, rustic, clay figurines silhouetted in bright window, industrial look catwalks across a keyboard. Frank sets his laptop on his piano. Contemporary, Jay's wife poking her head in to say hi. Mid-century modern credenza. A stray toddler, little Gregory, cooing as he passes. We curate our frames. Everyone wants to see something. Everyone wants us to see something. An object, a quality. My guitar hangs on the wall behind me. I have placed such worn titles as Merton's Conjectures of a Guilty Bystander and Shirky's Here Comes Everybody in plain view for everyone who's looking. Drawing my name from a hat, Alan assigns me the roles of Theseus, the Duke of Athens, and Oberon, King of the Fairies. They're both men, though Shakespeare's fairies are hermaphrodites in my memory of them. Both lead their minions, an earthly troop in chainmail and swordplay on one hand, and on the other a band of spirits, peas blossom, moth, and cobweb among them. I want to say that Theseus is doctrinaire, bound up with fear, and that Oberon is a noble and supportive guy who will drug his wife with magic to steal the changeling. The play is a comedy. Playing the parts of Helena and Hermia, our London friends Stacy and Pauline reintroduce us to their 11-and-a-half-year-old girl Caitlin. In her pajamas, she's dragged her blanket into the frame on her way to Betty Bye. I met her once when she was an infant, and again a year ago. She'd recently heard the old-fashioned phrase, "If such and such happens, I'll eat my hat." It was like a song stuck in her head that she kept singing. If mom's on time, I'll eat my hat. I'll eat my hat if there aren't a million people already waiting. I'll eat my hat if I need my dumb coat after all. I remember feeling charmed by this and also a little jealous to be in the newness of it all. I told a story called The Hat Eaters in her honor. It was about all of us. Everyone roundly panned it as satire that was less a piece of social commentary and more a laundry list of my own personal grievances. I've always felt this was an overreaction, but that's not important either. What's important is that we all have our parts to play. If I know this crowd, we will read loudly and softly and with gusto. We will modulate our voices. My copy of A Midsummer Night's Dream comes from an anthology published in Cleveland in 1925 by the World Syndicate Company. It belonged to my late grandmother on my father's side and includes all the Bard's comedies. Its faux leather cover hangs by a thread. The printers have included the phrase, "A triumph was a public show," in a distinct font in the bottom margin of the first page of the play. These words are not part of the script, appearing nowhere else in the volume. They feel more poignant than practical. The more times I read them, the more they sound like an incantation. And why the past tense? But this, too, is beside the point. We're all online together, and it's time to start. I clear my throat and say to my friends in a fairly flat voice, "Now, fair Hippolyta, our nuptial hour draws on apace. This is my Theseus. This is my Oberon."
Wow. Fantastic. I absolutely love that you were getting together with people online to enjoy Shakespeare. Had you been doing that before the pandemic, or was it something that...
It was something new, actually. Yeah. Let me plug my book here for a second, everyone. This is yeah.
Too Bright to See.
Yeah.
Oh, fantastic. So this is your first anthology of poems, isn't it?
It is, yeah.
And are they all, were they all written during the pandemic, or is it a collection that spans a lot wider time frame?
It expanded. There are a couple poems that I wrote almost 20 years ago, but most of them I wrote over the course of about 4 years.
Okay.
Yeah.
And how's it going? How does it feel to be published now?
It feels wonderful. Yeah, I mean, it's really great. It exceeded my expectations. It's been really nice. Modest sales, but that's okay. But just the idea of having it out there and being able to, even in this moment, to share with you makes it exciting.
It's fantastic. And can we put some links down in the description and in the pinned comments so that people can see where to get a copy? Would that be okay?
We can. And I can send those links to you. Is that how that works?
Yeah, absolutely. Or in fact, if you like, I can just take them from your Twitter account, because I know that they're on there.
They are. And I wonder if that's actually a good point. So the blog is there, and then I'll send you
yes.
I'll send you a link to where you can buy the book.
That would be perfect. So tell us about the blog then, because you are a very prolific writer of your blog, not just of poetry.
Yeah. I actually I'm finding myself having to slow down a bit because I'm on break now, and I just write. I get up every morning and I just write something, and I have to resist putting it on my blog. But the blog is called Sacred Pedestrians, and it's sacredpedestrians.com, and it was just kind of. I wanted some kind of a term to kind of, I explained it on my blog. I wish I had the wording written out in my mind, but just this idea of kind of contrasting what is sacred with what is pedestrian is kind of my MO. Some of the nicest things that people have said about this is that one of the nicest things that people seem to say is that it's about everyday life. And so that's kind of what I'm interested in, is writing about everyday life. But it's called Sacred Pedestrians, and it's very expansive. I mean, there's a lot of writing in it now, and much of what's in it will go into a second book, of course. But I try to pair what I write with photographs I've taken, or photographs that I've procured, and I just want to. I just want to kind of keep putting. It's kind of hard to explain, but one of the things I realized, I've been writing for 30 years now. And it's always hard, and all writers have this in common, except for those lucky ones. It's very hard to get published. And one of the things that's really nice about this time, I'm thinking now about John Clay's comments about social media, is it's now possible for me, for instance, to publish something immediately if I want to, and get a few people to read it. In a way that I just couldn't do it before. You have to imagine I would maybe get half a dozen, half a dozen really exciting publications in a 20-year period or something, and now I can put my poetical writings right up, immediately. And what I've done is I basically amassed a book-like reading experience unto itself, but it comes complete with images that are hopefully evocative.
I felt like when I looked at your blog that it was almost like seeing life through your eyes. It was like I was wearing your glasses even, and seeing your perspective, seeing the same things that you'd seen. And that's what really struck me about your blog, that it was just like walking in someone else's shoes, even, to use another cliche. But it really was. It was fascinating. So I would definitely recommend people clicking on those links and having a look. It'd be brilliant. And it's really exciting to hear that there is another book in construction at the moment.
I'm going to be one comment on your comment real quickly is that there is a gentleman in town here whose opinion I admire, and he said if I didn't know you, David, I would know you after reading your book. So that's kind of thing. So anyway, so I hopefully finish this summer another collection which will be very similar to this one, and I'm excited. I'm going to be doing a little bit of writing in Ireland. I've never been to Ireland, but I'm going to be doing a bit of a writing retreat in Ireland. And I actually had wanted to cross paths with some of the people you've mentioned here in England, but I just couldn't work that out. I know you know about that, but I couldn't work that out just for financial and logistical reasons. But maybe in the future something like that will happen. But I am going to hopefully be done by the end of summer or the fall at the latest. And a lot of the same territory in this writing, but put in new ways. And interestingly, nothing about COVID.
We've come full circle.
We have come full circle. We have come full circle, and I would like to. I'm hoping that COVID never gets so serious again that it becomes an urgent topic for a creative writer.
I hope that the future means that we, like you mentioned, take our resilience and all of the good things that happened and focus on those. And I hope that it's a positive future for all of us, despite some of the negative aspersions that I was casting earlier on in the interview. Sorry about that.
No, I like that. I think it's right. I hear your children in the background, and I hope that the future is great for them. But I hope that the future is great because of them. I think it's both those things. I know that's a lot of pressure to put, a lot of emotional weight for any parent to carry. But I think we can all look at that in a pretty sober way, and all agree.
That's a lovely day. And they were asked to be quiet during the interview, so I'm really sorry if you.
They're pretty good.
But I absolutely agree with you there. I mean, all we can do is try our very best, and it's interesting to think that these kids are going to grow up with that experience of COVID, and it will never leave them. They'll never forget what they've been through. But at the same time, it's difficult to appreciate for us that to them, that could very well have happened to all of us at the same age. So I think.
But maybe the gift of it all is that they are part of a society that understands more immediately kind of the roles of cooperation and collaboration when this kind of thing happens again. And I think that's one thing that we were lacking. We were never going to reach herd immunity, even though you and I have both expressed our tolerance for that. We were never going to reach herd immunity without a kind of collaboration and a kind of tolerance that maybe they've learned a little bit more about than we ever had in this experience.
Such a positive thought to end the interview on. I'm very grateful for that, because not only have we gone full circle talking about COVID and writing and poetry and books, but we've gone full circle emotionally as well. I feel like we've talked about the highs, the lows, and I think that's a lovely way to finish, thinking about children being the future and the positivity that they bring and everything that they can teach us. Perfect. So I'd like to officially give you a huge thank you for talking. It's been fascinating, honestly fascinating.
No, thank you.
I wish you all the success with your writing, your current books, your new book, your blog, everything that you're doing, and of course your teaching. How on earth do you get time to do anything else?
I don't know. I mean, we're not raising kids, so we have that big opening in our schedules. Yes. Yeah.
Okay, well, I would absolutely love to chat to you in the future, possibly if you fancied. We're doing more interviews about for writers. There's another series called Write Up.
I
So
saw
maybe,
that.
yeah, let's get in touch when your new book comes out, and we could chat about it then if you want to.
That would be wonderful. Thank you so much. I appreciate this. This has been fun and very easygoing, which is what I hope for.
Oh, that's lovely. And yeah, it really was brilliant to meet you. Thank you ever so much.
Okay.
Right. Well, there is just enough time for me to ask you to like, subscribe, and to put the bell notification on so that you never miss an episode. And don't forget, if you like this channel, don't tell me, tell your friends. I'll see you next time.